yay, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I pissed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky, but I don't wanna pay. I've been on furlough since May. Now I'll go and listen to a Cockney attitude. Ooh, breaking away. Got to find a better way. I'd rather watch Auf Wiedersehen again and listen to what these old men have to say.
Hello, and welcome back to Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. And this is episode number 18. And it is me, your genial host, Mr. Andy Sledge, and my co-host and partner in crime and blackjack player extraordinaire, we are here, Mr. George Bradley. George, I've got to do something for this is a little nod to one of our shout outs. So George, how the Neville are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Yeah.
What's been happening in the world of London?
Usual. Had the old win from the blackjack, but the bad news is I gave half of it back again. I've still got one half of it though, so
Quit while you're ahead, George. Quit while you're ahead.
Well, that's the thing. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, just usual online shopping, out to the pub, home, dinner, bed, repeat. Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, we are of that age where that is as exciting as it gets. So yeah, for me, I'm trying to stick to my diet, going training, went training a lot, went to the gym a lot. So I've dropped a notch on the belt. So I'm like an inch waist size. So yeah, so feeling good. So got to keep the diet mindset and keep moving forward with the anti being a big fat bastard. So yeah, that is the state of play at the moment. But like you say, apart from that, I actually went on a very nice lunch yesterday, but I'm gonna keep that all private to myself.
Yeah.
So yes. So if any of our loyal listeners and watchers would care to interact with the podcast, we do appreciate all feedback, whether it be constructive criticism, absolute praise, and or just / straight up abuse. And we welcome you to email us on aufwiedersehenagain@gmail.com. That's aufwiedersehenagain@gmail.com. We welcome you to follow us on all forms of social media. So our Instagram is @Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. That's Instagram @Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Please follow us on Twitter, which is @Auf Again. That's @Auf Again. Our Facebook page, we implore you to like and share the Facebook page amongst your friends. And also, if you could also do us a massive favor, on the top of the Facebook page, if you scroll along, there is a little tab that says community. If you go to community, and then you click on that, and then there's a little box that says add friends. And then another thing comes up and says add all friends. You tick that, and then it ticks the list of all of your friends, and you click send invitation. If you do that, we will love you forever. And we may even send you a gift if you can prove that you've invited many of your friends. We'll work that one out. So that's the Facebook page of Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Please do subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. So you click the subscribe button and click the bell. And what that does is that alerts you to any new episodes. But if mine and George's faces are enough to put you off YouTube, which, let's face it, very, very likely, then you're free to just listen to our dulcet tones on all audio platforms. So you can find us on all good podcast platforms, Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google, Breaker, and many, many more. New episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. And as always, our fantastic theme music is composed and performed by the guitar man, Mr. Lee Dosky. So please, please, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And as always, we here at Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast are sponsored by Top Gun Tattooing of number 12, the Harris Arcade in Reading. So their website, www.topguntattoo.co.uk. Their telephone number is 01189 968 667. And as always, two amazing offers for the listeners of the podcast. So offer number one, you are entitled to a 20% discount of any tattoo with Zach from Top Gun Tattooing, award-winning tattooist with a stupid bit of metal in his face. Tell him that. But in order to achieve this 20% discount, you need the code word. And the code word is, as always, Halloween Shite, man.
Halloween Shite.
And we have the greatest offer, the only offer in podcast history of a free tattoo. And the free tattoo, terms and conditions apply, is that you get the Neville and Lottie tattoo. Now, George, how close are we to getting you? Because you're going to come down again next week, aren't you? How close?
Yeah, hopefully, yeah.
How close are we to getting you the Neville and Lottie tattoo?
Well, it all depends on the alcohol intake, I'd imagine, and my mental state of mind at the time, I suppose.
Well, I've got something that you might like here, right? How about we give you a trial run at the Neville and Lottie tattoo?
Well, maybe.
Right. Well, look, no maybe about it, George. I have gone out of my way to acquire some Neville and Lottie tattoos just for you.
Oh, no.
No, because we don't hold grudges here at our Wiedersehen Again podcast, and to prove that we are indeed welcoming of all people, I actually went on to the official Auf Wiedersehen Again Pet site. The ones that have banned us from their Facebook.
Yeah.
Those petty, pathetic people that have banned us from their Facebook page. Well, not want to hold a grudge. I went and spent money on their site and I purchased some Neville and Lottie tattoos. And those tattoos are for you, George. So
thanks.
Next week, when you come up here, when you're taking us out for steak once again with your blackjack winnings, the first thing we shall be doing is we shall be applying your Neville and Lottie tattoo. George, how excited are you?
Oh, I can't wait.
Exactly. So,
do they come with a bandage as well?
We can sort that one out. We can definitely sort you out a bandage as well. So, we have a few shout outs this week. We've had some interaction from some of our loyal listeners, and we have been getting a lot of support from another podcast. So I just want to say a big shout out to the Paul and Griff Show. And what the Paul and Griff Show is, the Paul and Griff Show are a movie podcast. So similar to what we do, but they do it for movies. So they have been giving us a lot of support on social media. So we just want to say a big shout out to the Paul and Griff Show. So all of our loyal listeners, if you can go and give them a follow and a listen, the Paul and Griff Show, they are a big supporter of the podcast. And as always, are one of our biggest supporters. We've had more emails in from Dougie Brown. Dougie Brown giving us some pointers and a couple of things that we missed on the last episode. So we always support, we always appreciate any pointers. And Dougie Brown, you are one of our loyal listeners, and we love your support. And we've got a new listener who again sent us a very nice email in, a young chap by the name of Gary Gorman. So Gary Gorman, new listener, says he's catching up on the podcast. So because he's starting at the beginning, he might not actually do this for a few weeks. But when he does, Gary, we love you. Okay.
Yeah.
A big shout out to Graham Teasdale. So, as we know, Graham Teasdale is the supplier of our fantastic prize for our giveaway competition. Giveaway. So we are here to announce our competition winner. So our competition winner via our Twitter page was Russell Cox. So Russell Cox liked and shared and tagged and did all of the necessary things, and he is chosen at random, and Russell Cox via the Twitter page. So Russell, if you can identify yourself to us by email at aufwiedersehenagain@gmail.com and send us your full address, and we will be sending you this genuine copy of the signed picture from season 3, provided to us by Graham Teasdale. Now, so that's the competition winner, but it doesn't stop there for young Graham, because I also received a package in the week, and Graham has provided us with more stuff. So he has also provided us with more pictures, genuine signed copy pictures. So we have one that looks like it's in the Barley Moor. Another one which is outside of the Barley Moor by the looks of things, and we have the traditional magnificent picture,
famous one.
So because we are currently around the Barley Moor, I think for our new competition giveaway, we will be doing the black and white inside the Barley Moor genuine signed copy of the characters inside of the pub. So I'll be posting up the new competition giveaway pictures posts on our social medias. So as always, what do you need to do to win? You need to go to the social media. You need to follow us on social media. You need to find the giveaway competition post. You need to like the post. You need to tag 3 friends, and you need to share that post. So on Facebook, you share it to your Facebook feed. On Twitter, you retweet it. And on Instagram, you share it to your story and you tag us in the picture. Not only that, however, Graham has also provided us with a car air freshener. He has made these fantastic air fresheners, which is an air freshener. Well, I mean, look, let's have it right. It's a picture of Wayne and an air freshener. But it is an absolute fantastic little combination. And bearing in mind, Graham sells these. So if any of these pictures, or if you would like a lovely little air freshener, then you can contact Graham via Facebook, Graham Teasdale on Facebook. And he is, like I say, the admin of the unofficial Auf Wiedersehen Pet and the Jimmy Nail Appreciation Society Facebook pages. And to be honest, I'm very tempted, because it's actually a very nice smelling air freshener. It's a strawberry one. So I'm actually very tempted to keep this and actually put it up in my car. We'll see how we get on over the weeks. So, well, like I say, what we will be doing is our next giveaway competition is the black and white picture, and that will be going up very, very shortly. So, there we go. George, you're one step closer to your Neville and Lottie tattoo. Russell Cox is our winner when we've given our shout outs, and we've got our we want to big up Graham Teasdale for providing us with more fantastic competition prizes. So that's all of the boring stuff and admin out of the way. So George, we are moving on, and we also have a very, very, very special announcement about this episode and the next three episodes, the next 4 episodes in total. And this is a world exclusive for the Auf Wiedersehen Again podcast. And we're going to mention that in a second, so do not go anywhere. So, like I said, this is episode 18 of Auf Wiedersehen Again podcast. And this episode, we are breaking down and discussing Series 2, Episode 5 of Auf Wiedersehen Pet. And the episode is entitled A Home from Home. And this episode was first broadcast on the 21st of March, 1986. So, A Home from Home. It was written by not Dick Clement and Ian Lafreniere, but it was written by the great Stan Hay, who has written 6 episodes of Auf Wiedersehen Pet. He wrote 2 in the series 1, and he's written 4 in series 2. Now, big announcement. I spoke to Stan Hay this week.
Hey.
And I interviewed Stan Hay on Zoom.
Oh.
And that interview is going to be broadcast with the podcast next week. So,
Brilliant.
this is the world exclusive, our very first guest who was part of the show. We do have a couple of other guests who were cast members lined up for season 3. So that's not going to be for a couple of months yet. But Stan was the first person who was involved very heavily. Obviously, was one of the writers who answered the call via social media. And we are eternally grateful to Stan for giving us some of his time. And I thoroughly enjoyed having a chat. And,
brilliant.
We are going to be releasing that interview with Stan Hay, the writer of this episode, and another 3 episodes in this series next week. So tell your friends.
How long are you chatting to him for? How long?
About half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. I mean, to be honest, I was, he wasn't in a rush, and he was, genuinely, he genuinely seemed, happy to and pleased to spend time with people who appreciate his work, and he was really funny, and he gave us some nice little insights. So it is definitely not one to be missed. So do tune in next week and tell your friends that there is the interview with Stan Hay, the writer of this episode. And what we find is, obviously, so the title of the episode, Home from Home, it refers to the fact that the lads are going to be now bedding down because of Wayne's indiscretion last episode. The lads are bedding down in Thornley Manor, and it is, basically the lads are back in squalid conditions like they were in Germany. Hence the name of the episode, Home from Home. So they are back where they all started, living in a crap hole. And it is, that's the entire basis of, one of the premises of, getting the lads back together was at some point they were going to try and recreate the squalid conditions that they were living in. And you think they have managed it with this. So we have a couple of cameos. We're going to talk about them later on. They are
the famous Page 3 girl.
Absolutely. And somebody else that had a very prolific career with over 114 credits on IMDb. But again, we will speak about that as and when they appear in the episode. So we open up, and the lads are looking for alternative accommodation after Wayne, like I say, so Wayne was caught in bed with Arthur Pringle's daughter, and
Katie Rabbit.
Yes, and so they were forcibly removed from the Barley Moor, and so they're desperately trying to find alternative accommodation. And so what we see is the episode opens, and Oz is coming out of a B&B, and he says to Moxie, he says, "I need room at the inn again. Same old story. Sudden party of travelling salesmen booked in this afternoon. You know what I mean." So obviously, what we find out is that Arthur Pringle has been on the jungle drums to the other proprietors of established area, and they are personas non gratas. And then obviously we cut to another outside another B&B. Both of these B&Bs are in the same village, where they're buildings that are in the same village as the Barley Moor, Red Mile in Leicestershire. And Neville says, and then we see Barry coming down the driveway of another establishment, and Neville says, "Any joy, Barry?" And oh, I tell you what, forgot to turn my phone off, didn't I? Let's make sure I've done that. Look, there we go. Nearly messed up. So Barry is coming down the drive, and Neville says, "Any joy, Barry?" And Barry says, "That's difficult to really say, Neville." He says, "It's strictly no overalls, no muddy boots, no alcohol, and lights out by 10:30. Neville says, "It could be worse." Barry says, "It is. They've only got double beds, and one of us will have to sleep with Oz." So they are obviously not keen on the prospect of sleeping with Oz, who would be with his pants. So Barry's van is driving down the road. Again, I believe that's in Leicestershire. And as he's driving down the road, you can see he turns his headlights on. And so that kind of indicates that they've been looking around all day, and they've got to the evening and they are no further forward. So they pull up on the road. So Oz and Moxie are in the carrier, was it the camper van, and Barry and Neville pull up in Barry's van, and Barry says, "What's the score?" And Moxie says, 5 knockbacks. Everywhere we've tried at a sudden spate of bookings. And then Oz says, "Yeah, it's obvious the old Pringle's been on the blower. Looks like we've been blacklisted by the entire Licensed Victuallers Association of North Derbyshire." Neville says, "We've not done much better." And Oz says, "Yeah." And he says, "The places we've tried aren't exactly geared towards the needs of the working man." And Barry says, Spa country this is, isn't it, Nev?" And he says, "Gentility rules." So Moxie says, "What do we do now?" And Barry says, "Well, as contingency plans A and B seem to have failed, I suggest we try contingency plan D." Which is what? And Barry says, "We find somewhere in Chesterfield." And Oz isn't too happy. He says, "Chesterfield? So that's going to mean a 50-mile round trip. Look, man, we're going to be wrecked before we even get to work, which means we're going to be more wrecked before we get on the drink." And
the
Barry,
important bit.
Yeah, exactly. Oz has got his priorities there. And Barry says, "Which leaves contingency plan E." And he says, "What's that?" And he says, and Moxie says, "What's that?" And Oz says, "Which is what?" And he says, "Move into the house itself." And Oz says, "I didn't know about that." And Barry says, "Well, it gets my vote, fellas. Listen, it's cheap, it's big, and we'll have it all to ourselves." And Moxie says, "Yeah, it gets my vote and all. I stayed in the pantry one night and survived." And Neville says, "Yeah, only just." And Oz says, it's pretty crusty though, isn't it?" I mean, this is Oz, saying this is pretty crusty from the man who was like, someone was talking about the hut. He went, what are you talking about? It's our eating here. So, it's got to be pretty shit for Oz to find it, the crusty. And he says, "It's a hell of a state, partly due to the fact that we've been knocking 7 colours out of it. Like," he says, "I mean, even the rats have pissed off." And Barry says, "Look, I said we'd give Dennis a ring before 8, see what he says." And Oz says, "I'd leave it to the leader." So Barry goes to the phone box and rings Dennis, where he's waiting with Bomber and Wayne. So Dennis is on the phone and he says, "Okay, all right, thanks a lot." He puts the phone down and he turns around to Bomber and Wayne. He says, "They've drawn a blank, so it looks like a move into the manor for the moment. Sorry, Bomber." And Bomber says, "Not your fault, Dennis. You're only the gaffer on site. You can't be responsible for any irresponsible act of any daft bugger outside of work," obviously meaning Wayne.
Yeah.
Dennis says, "Right, come on." And so if you notice, what they do is Dennis and Bomber just walk off, and they leave their bags just sat
with Wayne.
Wayne's got to then pick the bags up, and Wayne's got to then pick the bags up. Part of his punishment is that. So the next thing they cut to the next scene, which is the cars are driving up the driveway of Thornley Manor in the dark. And Neville says it looks worse at night than it does by day. Moxie says it's not too bad. Once you get inside, it's a bit like prison, really, which again is a bit of a nod to the fact that where they filmed the prison scene were in the first episode when Moxie was still in jail. So inside Thornley Manor, Bomber's found a room that he thinks is suitable for the lads to sleep in, and then he goes and he finds a rug, and he rolls it up and he takes it through, and Wayne is sweeping the floor of the room that they're all going to sleep in, and Bomber says, "I found this, Wayne. It should take the chill off the room." And Wayne said, "You'd need a bloody blow lamp to take the chill out the atmosphere, though, wouldn't you?" And Bomber says, "'Tis true. You wouldn't win any popularity contest at the moment." And Wayne says, "Look, if I'd have known old Arthur was going to react that badly, I'd have thought twice about strumping his daughter, wouldn't I?" And Bomber says, "Yes." And he says, "Yes, and having had those thoughts, you'd have still gone and done it. Knob." And he says, "Noblo."
You can't blame him, really.
No. I mean, fair play to him. She was a very pretty young lady. And he says, "Noblo." He says, "That's what you're ruled by, Wayne. As soon as there's a fire in your loins, there's a freeze up in your brain." So, and Wayne says, "Yeah, but normally it's only me that suffers, ain't it?" He says, "Grazed knee from shinning down a few drain pipes and the odd pulled muscle from doing it to the old bolero at 45 instead of 33. And so Bomber, Wayne's trying to make a joke out of it, and Bomber cuts him a dirty look, and Wayne says, "Look," he says, "I might have dropped my mates in it because I couldn't say no to an afternoon of passion." And then he started and he goes, "But she wasn't half worth it, though."
Yeah, right, it was.
And Bomber says, "Well, that's some consolation to us, Wayne." He says, "Right, when you finished your jankers," now that's a fantastic word, jankers. Yeah. I don't know if it was ever something.
Yeah, army term, yeah.
Yeah. Well, when I was in the Scouts, and we used to go on Scout camp, they used to have basically chemical toilets, and whoever had fucked up during the camp, got the job of cleaning the chemical toilets at the end of the stay, and called jankers. And if whoever was the fucking biggest idiot on camp generally had to do jankers, and I generally ended up having to do it every fucking time because I was a bit of I was a bit of a non-conformist. So yes, he says, "While you finished your jankers," he says, "I'll have a scout around and see if we can find some mattresses and cushions." And then he pokes his head back around the door and he says, "You better decide which one of the 22 bedrooms you're going to lock yourself in." So we cut to the kitchen and we see Oz and Moxie loading up the fridge with a considerable amount of cans of beer.
Yeah, quite a lot. Yeah.
And Moxie says, he goes, "I think it's actually colder out here than it is in the fridge." And Oz says, "I think you're right." And he says, and then Dennis comes in. He says, "All right, lads." And he says, "Hello, Den. All right, Dennis." And then he says, "Have you been shopping?" And "You've been shopping." And like I said, there's just all you can see is beer. And he says, "I just got some," and Oz says, "I just got some essential supplies from the little village store." And Den asks for the keys for the van. And he says, "Aye, how'd this?" And he says, "Oh, I've got the receipt for that lot and all." And he gives the receipt to Dennis. He goes, £27.62. And he goes, "Aye, that includes the bog roll." So they've got beer and bog roll. And this is a common theme for Oz when what he considers to be essential supplies for the house. And so Barry and Neville come into they're back in the place where they're going to be kipping, and Bomber's lit a fire, and they've tried to make it a bit more homely with some sheets and pillows, etc. And obviously Wayne, if you notice, so they've lined up the beds on the rug, but Wayne is back in the corner on his own.
Yeah.
And Barry says, yes, that's better. He says, "At least one room's habitable." He says, "Yeah, he says, I could see us settling in here with the idyllic country view and the flickering glow from the fireside, it's an elegant room. Do you know this could be Brideshead revisited? Negative Neville, he says, reminds me more of Gateshead revisited. All it needs is a tin bath in the hearth. And Barry says, never mind, Nev. He says, yeah, look, we'll get some sleeping bags at Asda tomorrow. You know, that's fantastic. And Wayne says, you know, you're right, actually. And Barry, and Wayne is still not. Wayne's still in the doghouse because Barry turned around, and Barry, you know, quite forcefully, which is out of character for Barry. Barry quite forcefully says, "Who asked for your opinions, dick brain?" The insult by Barry, calling him dick brain. And Neville says, "We could do with."
Well, he knows he's got the backing of the other lads, doesn't he?
Well, exactly. Yeah. And Neville says, "We could do with the rest from you, Wayne. Okay." Again, Neville quite forceful. And Wayne just says, "All right, fine." He says, "Look, I've tried to say I'm sorry, but I can't do much more, can I?" And Neville says, "No, but don't go expecting instant forgiveness, all right?" And Bomber says, "It's all right. I've told him a few days in the doghouse, and if he keeps his nose clean and stays out of trouble, he might get some remission." And Wayne says, "Yeah, but I mean, Barry sort of likes it here, don't he? So I'm doing him a favour, ain't I?" And like he tries to make a joke out of it, and Bomber's like, you know, Bomber's been trying his best to get him back. Like Bomber's doing Wayne a favour by trying to re-ingratiate him back in the group, and Wayne just sticks his foot in it, and Bomber's like, "Wayne!" And he's like, yeah, stum. So then everyone else enters, Oz, Dennis, and Moxie. So this is where we find out about Moxie, and he says, "All right, lads, can I just have a minute?" And Oz says, "You can have as long as you want, Dennis. We're not going anywhere, are we?" And again, he cuts Wayne a dirty look as he comes past, and Moxie dishes out a few tinnies. And Dennis says, "Now then." And he says, "Thanks." And he gets a beer off Moxie. And he says, "Considering the short notice in which our previous tenancy agreement was terminated," gives Wayne a dirty look. He says, "You lads haven't done too bad to get this place habitable." Now, this is like one of the funniest things ever. So at this point, Oz takes a photograph of Arthur Scargill.
Yeah.
Sticks it up on the wall, and you're like, that's a bit weird. Now, it's worth noting at this point that it is a colour photograph. So there is a colour photograph of Arthur Scargill that he puts up on the wall. And Dennis continues, he said, "I know it's not perfect by any means, but at least there's a roof over your heads. Now, as far as work's concerned, we've had the clearance to start again, but depending on what Ali Fraser has in mind for the place, we'll have to wait for the architect to come up with a new plan. So in the meantime, if Bomber and Oz, if you concentrate on the cellar," right? Oz says, Dennis, he says, "Moxie and Wayne make good the panelling and the plastering that's been ripped away. You can start on the electrical work, Barry. Neville, stop in the kitchen." And Moxie taps Dennis on the shoulder and he goes, "What's the matter, man, Moxie, man?" And he says, "Oh, aye." And he said, like Moxie whispers in Dennis's ear, and he says, "Oh, aye." He says, "We've got this new bloke working for us now." There's you telling Moxie. So Moxie says, "Yeah, well," he says, "some of you already know. I've got a new identity so far as officialdom is concerned. I am now Brendan Mullicky." So yes, Moxie has got a false identity and he pronounces the name wrong. And Oz says, "What?" And he says, "What? Oh, what?" And obviously everyone's laughing. And Moxie says, "So would it help like if you started calling us Brendan so I can get used to it?" And Neville says, "It's going to take a while." He says, "Yeah," he says, "but you can call us by my new name." But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, like, "Call us by the old one, you know, just to test me reflexes." And Dennis says, "I didn't know you had any Moxie." Sorry, Brendan. And Wayne says, "What I don't understand," and Oz just going, "Shut your gob, you." And Neville, "Who asked you?" And again, you know, Wayne's been given no opportunity to get involved. And Dennis says, "Right, lads," he says, "I've got to leave this happy band and get back to the cross keys, all right?" And then Oz, next to Arthur Scargill, then puts up a page 3 picture.
Yeah.
He's clearly his two favourite things: Arthur Scargill, who's a bit of a rebel, and a pair of tits. So he's quite happy with that. And Oz, he says, "Oh, aye." He says, "I'll read for some, isn't it?" And Dennis says, "Look, it's only for one night, Oz, man. I'll be back with you tomorrow." And Oz says, "Oh, not now. You're the gaffer. You'll not, will you?" And Dennis goes, "What?" And he says, "I said that." He says, "Even though we're sleeping on the site now, we'll want travelling time. You can tell Ali Fraser that." And Dennis says, "Oh, aye." He says, "What if he wants to start charging you rent for living on his property?" And Oz, like, that stums him up, and he sort of turns back and cowers away. And he says, "Right, oh, aye." And he throws the keys to the van and gives it to Neville. And he says, "I'd better take your car, Wayne, because the lads will need the van to go shopping." And Wayne tries to protest. He's like, "No, hang on." And Dennis just goes, "Right, come on." And like demands Wayne's car keys. And obviously Wayne's in no position to argue.
Yeah.
Hands over his car keys. And he says, "Right, I'll be over tomorrow afternoon after I've seen the architect. Sleep well." And Oz says, "Oh, aye." And Dennis says, he's talking about where he says, "Look, didn't be too hard on him, man." He says, "I mean, just imagine if it wasn't for him now, you'd be stuck in the barley moor with Arthur Pringle staring down his miserable gob." And Oz says, "Aye, drinking freezing cold pints of bitter, having a game of 5s and 3s, listening to his jukebox and eating nice fresh sandwiches." And he says, "Well done, London." And he throws his beer can at him and very nearly hits him right in the head. So Moxie stands up and he says, "Yeah." He says, "Well, I think I'll go down the galley and get a brew on." And as he's walking out, Barry goes, "Brendan." And like Moxie's just completely oblivious. And everyone bursts out laughing at Moxie's inability to recognise his new name. And so Neville says, "Something tells me it's going to be a struggle for him." So we cut from the grotty surroundings of Thornley Manor to the palatial surroundings of Kenny Ames's
Marbella.
Yeah. So Kenny Ames's villa is actually, the real villa is actually in a place called Benahavis, which is up in the mountains from Marbella. So to get to Benahavis, down the coast from Marbella to past a place called San Pedro, which was the one that Barry said was the one that Barry says is a picturesque dog hole in a future episode. And you hang a right up the hill, and it's about a 20-minute drive, half an hour drive up the hill to Benahavis. So Ali Fraser arrives at Kenny Ames's villa. Kenny Ames is sprawled out on his sun lounger, and Ali Fraser is commonly known to do, he likes to use people's names when he's speaking to them. And he goes, "Good morning, Kenneth." And then and obviously Kenny Ames doesn't move, and he says, "Don't get up." And Kenny Ames says, "Ellie, my son." He goes, "Bit early for you, ain't it?" He goes, "I hope." And he says, "I hope an earthquake has not struck Casa del Fraser." And he says, No, Kenny." He says, "But as it happens, it is property that I would like to discuss with you." And Kenny Ames says, "Oh, certainly." He says, "I take it from the briskness of your manner that it is your manner that is giving you concern again." And Ali, "It's funny you should anticipate that, Kenny. It's almost as if you knew about the problems I would have with this house before you sold it to me." And Kenny pleads innocence. He says, "Nothing like that. It's just I'm feeling rather perceptive today. Now, how can I help you?" And he says, "It's just I've had a word with this architect of mine, and he tells me that there's a reasonable, if limited, scope for us to redevelop the interior of the house, provided we do not molest the exterior." And Kenny makes a bad joke. He says, "A bit like having an arse lift without a facelift." And Ali says, "Very good." He says, "Yes." He says, "I'm also reliably informed that the idea of time-sharing units would be a non-runner as for the local authority is concerned. As far as the local authority is concerned. And as for your idea of a fat farm, that would be no more generously considered." And so Kenny starts coming up with ideas. He says, "Why don't you threaten to sell it? to one of those bagwash religious sects.
Bagwash, I know what that means.
Never heard that expression. He says that would soon make the council change their tune, wouldn't it? And Ali Fraser says, I'd be interested in a rather more practical suggestion, Kenny. And he gets up and he starts pouring himself a drink, and Kenny says, oh yeah, have a drink. And I mean, it's obviously clearly very, very early morning, and they're hitting the drink already. And so Kenny picks up a copy of the Country Life magazine, and he says, let's see what we can find. And he says, here we are, just the job. Private nursing home, or as they term it, retired gentlefolk. There you go, son, sprouting up all over the place they are. And Ali Fraser, he says, and it sounds a bit of a change from my country pads for city slickers idea. And Kenny says, and you're simply going from exploiting disposable income to disposable people. And actually, there is more purse in the latter. And he says, how do you reckon that, Kenny? And he is sort of flying by the seat of his pants and making it up as he goes along here, Kenny Ames, trying to sound like he knows. And he goes, well, it's more turnover of people, obvious, isn't it? And he says, and the other key of this situation is not only do you get fees from the DHSS, but also from grateful couples whose grannies you have got off their hands. It's a win and a place, son. So Kenny Ames is trying to sell him the idea of setting up this nursing home. Yeah, it's a win and a place. I like that. And Ali Fraser, again, suspicious. He says, you seem remarkably well informed about this, Kenny. And he says, oh yeah, he says, one of these was high on my investment portfolio before my forced exile. He goes, oh, come on, Ali. He goes, it's a cinch. He says, after your initial building cost, he says, your only overheads offer the soup, the walking frames, and the old matron as window dressing. And what's a council with a heart is gonna turn? He says, what council with a heart is gonna turn down building permission for an old folks home? I mean, I ask you. And then Ali is, you can see he's becoming convinced, and he says, well, he says, I'll have a word with my man on the spot and see what he says. And he says, you pitch him for this, son, and Bob's your uncle. And Ali says, or your granddad in this case. And that makes Kenny laugh. And he goes, oh yeah, he goes, I've told you I was feeling perceptive today. And if there was any lingering grievance about me, which I'm sure there is not, he says, about me having sold you this very desirable piece of property, well, now we're sweet, aren't we? So Kenny Ames has dug himself out of the fact that he actually sold Ali Fraser a bit of a lemon. And he says, yes, he goes, and Ali Fraser, quite shrewdly, he says, for the time being, Kenny. And he goes, good. And then he holds up, and Ali Fraser holds up the Country Life magazine. He says, you take this regularly then? He says, oh, yeah. He says, I get very nostalgic for the old country. Living abroad makes me miss all of these English things like the GGs, my executive box at Spurs, cold, misty mornings, and English breakfast to go with them. And as he's reminiscing about England, a beautiful young lady in a bikini comes walking down the steps, and she kisses Kenny. And then and as she kisses Kenny, like there's a shot where it looks up and you see Kenny Ames's profile with the Union Jack flag in the background, and then his beautiful young girlfriend, or whatever she is, could be one of his porn actresses.
I would think that's pretty likely, yeah.
Yeah. So she dives into the swimming pool, and Ali Fraser, he says, then again, he says, there are compensations. So they cut from again the vast polar opposites of the level of luxury. They cut back from Kenny Ames's villa back to Thornley Manor, and it is the morning, and Barry is frying eggs very, very badly.
Quite a lot of them, yeah. And
he's frying eggs, and he's got a big metal hinge. They've obviously got no kitchen tools, and he's using a hinge to turn the bacon over. And anyway, so Bomber enters the kitchen, and Barry's wearing a green jumper, and he says, bloody hell, he says, I thought it was the Green Goddess for a minute. And if those of you who don't know, the Green Goddess used to be one of them fitness birds on breakfast telly, didn't she? I think she unfortunately...
She's still on the go, yeah. I think Diana Moran, I think, was her
Didn't
name.
she die of cancer?
I don't know. I think she was still on the go. I think
No, as far as I'm aware...
Oh, maybe you're right. You're right. Maybe, yeah. I haven't seen her for a while. Yeah.
I was of the opinion, if memory serves me correctly, that the Green Goddess died of cancer quite young. But we shall check that for our loyal listeners and let you know next episode. But yeah, so anyway, Bomber comes in and says, I thought it was the Green Goddess for a minute. And Barry says, no. He says, Glyn Christian, me, mate. He says, give the lads a shout, will you? Tell them their first country house breakfast is very nearly ready, will you? And he, like I say, he flips the bacon with the hinge. So Bomber goes into the bedroom where they're asleep and he kicks Nev. And Bomber says, shake a leg, will you? Grubs up. And Neville sort of wakes up and he goes, where's Oz? Now, if you notice, they look over to where Oz was sleeping, and what was a colour picture of Arthur Scargill has miraculously changed into a black and white picture of Arthur Scargill. So there was a bit of a continuity cock up there.
Well spotted, yeah.
Well, I'd like to take credit for that, but it was on the IMDb. So so Moxie says,
well spotted on IMDb.
Yeah, whoever that was on IMDb, you did a good job there.
Yeah. Oh, actually, I just checked. Diana Moran is still alive. She's 89.
Oh my! Oh, well, there you go. So who died then? I'm sure there was one of them. Was it Mad? Is Mad Lizzie still around? Do you remember Mad Lizzie? I don't know, but there was. I'm pretty sure there was one of them breakfast. Anyway, look, let's not worry about that.
Anyway, yeah.
So Moxie says, he's talking about Oz, and he says he woke up during the night, didn't he, complaining about my snoring. And he said when he couldn't get back to sleep because of this owl kept tooting, so he lifted up his bed and walked. And Neb says, I wonder where he went. So he starts to go look, and he says, I better go and see if I can find him, I suppose. And Moxie says, he must be the only bloke I know who can sleep through the smell of hot lard. And so we notice later on when they go to the shops, they buy lard. Do you remember when you were a kid and everything was cooked in lard? And now, like, if someone tried to cook you some breakfast in lard, you'd fucking punch them, wouldn't you? You know what I mean?
Oh, sorry.
But yeah, lard. I remember that was it. You know, I used to cook your bacon in lard, and I can't believe. I mean, you know, it was just artery clogging central, wasn't it? So, anyway, Nev's walking around and he's shouting Oz, and he goes upstairs, Oz, and he's looking in all the rooms. And then there's a wardrobe on its back, and Nev goes in the room and looks in the door. And then as he's walking out, the wardrobe's on its back, and the door is kicked open. And Oz leans up and he puts on a vampire voice and he goes, I've told you never to wake me in daylight, slave. And then he gives it the vampire impression, which is quite funny. So they cut back from Thornley Manor. They go to the Cross Keys, and Den is there with Norma, and Norma's in the car, which I think is a Ford Escort by the looks of things. And
Mark II, I think. Yeah.
Oh, well, look, you've got a better knowledge of escorts than I have there, young George. And he says, Norma says, I'll give you a ring during the week. And Dennis says, no, he says, I'll have to ring you, Pet. He says, because I'm moving in again with the lads tonight, just like old times there. Again, home away from home. And Norma says, take care of yourself. And he says, you take care too. And he says, if you see the Bairns, give them my love. And she says, okay, ta-ra, ta-ra. And she drives off. So they go to Asda. And it's still in Asda now to this day, but obviously looks a bit more modern these days. So they pull up, and Barry's trying to be Mr. Organisation, and he says, right, I think the most efficient thing to do would be to split up into two groups of two, right? And he says one half could take one half of the list, and the other take the other. And he says one can read out while the other gets the stuff off the shelves. And Oz is just like time and motion, man, in the making. He says, yeah, give us this. And he takes the list from Barry, glanced at it, right, and he tears off He says, right, me and Moxie will get the beer and the bog roll, and you two can get the rest. So again, Oz's priorities are consistent of beer and bog roll. And Neville says, I think Barry had a slightly more even division of labour in mind, Oz. And he said, and Oz says, did he? He says, well, tough shit. He says, he's lucky to get me along on this trip at all. He says, I never thought I'd see the day I was pouncing about in supermarkets. So I don't know where Oz was obviously buying food from previous to this. But yes. So they cut from the Asda car park and they are in the architect's office. So as we find out, Howard Radcliffe, the architect, has rented local offices. And I don't know how, I mean, he talks about how Ali's justified the cost of renting offices. I'm like, that, what? It's like renting an office and being permanently somewhere is cheaper than a few train tickets from Newcastle to Derby. I'm like, that. Anyway, so they're in the architect office and there's a cardboard model of Thornley Manor on the table. And Dennis says, he says, well, this is very nice. I hope Ali's picking up all the bill for this, is he? And Howard says, aye, well, he says, I did manage to persuade him that it would have been cheaper for me to rent offices down here than to travel from Newcastle every week. And Dennis says, aye, he says, it's a pity he wasn't so obliging towards my lads, where we're having to squat in the manor at the moment. And Howard has no sympathy, and he says, well, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. And he offers him coffee, and he says milk and sugar, and he says, aye, two, please. And then Dennis gets down to brass tacks, and he says, any word from Ali? And he says, aha, he says he phoned from Spain this morning. He was in very business, he said he was in a very business-like mood. And Dennis says, that sounds ominous. And he says, on the contrary, he's made a very shrewd decision as it happens. Thornley Manor is to become an old folks' home. And Dennis says, really, that's a bit of a change from time-sharing flats, isn't it? Suddenly feeling his age, is he? He says, I don't know what his motives are, but he says, I do know that the planning permission will be a breeze. Government grants will be available for some of the work, and once completed, the premises will be rate-free. And Dennis says, oh, that sounds like a good hand. He says, does that not alter your plans, though? I mean, presumably, that wipes out the jacuzzi and the Nautilus gym and the squash court and the bar. That will have to go. And Howard says, he says, some alterations will be necessary, obviously. He says, however, let's have a look at the model. Now, essentially, we'll be altering the balance of the design from large self-contained units with some communal facilities to a reduced, less private unit space per person, but with larger areas for group activity. And Dennis just sums it up and he goes, small bedrooms, big bogs, eh? And Howard says, that will be the strand of the redevelopment, yes. And Dennis says, so how long is this going to take for new plans then? He says, you'll have them by the end of the week. He says, I've done a few of these oldies homes before, and they're a piece of cake, really. And Dennis says, aye, well, grown old is a growth industry, obviously. Is there anything that we can work on in the meantime? And he says, aye, well, the kitchens will need to be extended to accommodate mass catering equipment, and I should imagine they'll take out that second stairwell and build in a lift. And then it says, always assuming Ali crumbles the cookie that way, of course, like. And Howard says, shall we see? And then Dennis says, little boxes. And I think he's referring to that song, Little Boxes, isn't it? Little Boxes.
Yeah.
All made out of ticky-tacky. And he says, little boxes before they get stuck in the littlest box of all. So they cut back to the supermarket, and Barry and Neville are getting the food. And Barry says, I've got to say, Neville, wait till we have the sleeping bags organised and a proper roster for the kitchen. It'll be just like Germany again. And Neville says, aye, that's what I'm afraid of. And they're putting stuff in the trolley like butter and what have you, and lard. And Nev says, and Barry says, Nev, he says, look, whatever deprivations we suffered here, and maybe about to suffer here again, there's no denying that sense of communal spirit is there. And then they get some bacon. He says, bacon, yes, rindless, best back and be favourite, judging by this morning. And Neville says, we've all moved on from there, though, haven't we? At least we're supposed to have done. It's just another depressing indication of our lack of upward mobility, that we're still roughing it. Country house or no. And then he's like, smoked or unsmoked about the bacon. And he says, get 3 of each to save the arguments. I mean, like, who eats unsmoked bacon? Ugh. It's like, you know, ridiculous. And he says, I think I'm trying to draw a distinction between quality of life and spiritual progress. And Neville says, Howie, let's get some Wonderloaf to go on with this bacon. And Barry says, let's get some flour and yeast to go with this bacon. And Neville says, I'd just as soon have bread, Barry. And he says, you will have. He says, I bake my own now. He says, when Hazel and me were betrothed, I took cookery lessons. See, it was very important not to fall into stereotype rules vis-a-vis domestic chores. Anyway, one of the things they taught me was how to make my own bread. And you know something, Neville? When they brought my little brown cob out of the oven, hand-baked by me, I nearly cried. He says, you know, now I think about how women must feel when they... And obviously there's a woman walking past, and Neville's a bit like, oh, you know, Barry's chatting absolute bollocks. So obviously the other side of the supermarket, Oz and Moxie have got a trolley. I don't know, they've already got a trolley half full of beer, but then they approach the beer section. You're like, well, where did they get that from? Anyway, so Oz, he says, thirsty work, this lot. And he just takes a can of beer out the trolley and opens it and starts drinking. And Moxie goes, oh, yeah. And he says, I tell you what, I'll be even thirstier when I've strung Wayne up by the bollocks for this latest indiscretion. And Moxie says, that's bloody thoughtless even by him. And so they get to the beer aisle and Oz just starts slinging in beer. And he says, the man's got no sense of moderation, Moxie, has he? Enough is never, he goes, no sense of moderation as he fills a trolley with beer. And then Moxie, he goes, hey, Oz, he goes, what? And he goes, do you think you can stop calling us Moxie? And he goes, and then there is again a bit of a continuity error. And he actually pronounces the name correctly. He says it's Brendan Mulcahy now. So before he said, my name's Brendan Mulcahy. And he says, it's Brendan Mulcahy now. And he said, and Oz says, is that the best you could get? Brendan Mulcahy. Mulcahy. He says, I mean, Moxie's alright. I can get away with that. He goes, because it rhymes with poxy. He goes, that's no bother. He goes, but I cannot see you as a Brendan, really, let alone a Mulcahy. And Moxie says, yeah, well, he goes, I'm stuck with it now, aren't I? He says, it's either a nickname or a life of constant anxiety, waiting for a gloved hand on me shoulder. And Oz says, hold on a minute. And he goes down the aisle and heads off around the corner. And then he comes back around the corner and approaches Moxie from behind. And he's got 4 cans of Guinness in his hand. And he puts on an Irish accent. And he says, fancy a pint of Guinness, Brendan? And he laughs, laughs heartily. And he throws the 4 cans of Guinness into the trolley. So they approach. They're coming back from the supermarket, and you'll notice. Have you noticed the music? The
Asda music.
Yeah. So as they're coming back, they've plagiarized the Asda music. So it's from the old Asda advert from back in the 80s. And so Barry, again, time and motion man, Barry says, listen, we've got so much on board. Right, he goes, I suggest we form a human chain between here and the kitchen. And Oz makes a joke. He said, where are you going to fit into that? As in meaning that Barry's not human. And he says, all I'm trying to do, Oz, is to maximize efficiency and minimize effort, right? He says, so if you and Moxie help us with the groceries, Neville and I will reciprocate by helping you with the beer. And Neville says, I don't think Oz understands the concept of time saving, Barry. He says, it's too many years of being paid by the hour. And Barry has a little bit of a giggle. And Oz reveals that they have been pretty shrewd. And he says, excuse me. He says, but we just happen to be one jump ahead of you two duck eggs. And he opens the side of the camper van and Moxie's there, and they've nicked the shopping trolley full of beer and the toilet. Obviously, so they've got the shopping trolley with the beer and the toilet roll in them. And Moxie says, "Smarter than the average bear, we are." And Moxie and Oz says, "Slightly after you." And so Moxie, they get out and they lift the trolley out and they're pushing it in and they start whistling the Asda tune. And Moxie even slaps his back pocket with his money in reference to the Asda ad, which is quite, quite funny. And Barry just says, "How can those two be so smart to think so laterally?" And he's obviously clearly frustrated, and he hands Neville a box. And Neville hands, a box to Barry. So we see them on their lunch break, out the little back bit where they had the fire in the previous episode. And again, Wayne is, in Coventry clearly, and he's sort of sitting out of the circle of everyone. And Moxie comes out with sandwiches, and Oz shouts, he goes, "Mind that snake there, Moxie." And Moxie jumps, he goes, where? And he drops the sandwich on the ground, and Oz just goes, "Ho ho." He says, "So much for special undercover agent Mulcahy, eh?" He goes, falls at the first fence, doesn't he? And Moxie, he picks up the sandwiches and he says, "It's hardly a fair test, Oz." He says, "Anyone would react to a snake warning no matter what his name was." And he says, "It's only what the police will do though, Brendan." He says, "You can't expect them to write you a letter telling them that they're coming to see you." And he goes, I know. He goes, "I'll just have to concentrate a lot harder. Anyone want a butty? These are ham." And so they all start grabbing a sandwich, and Barry says, "I'll have a cheese and chutney." And he doesn't even offer, which is a bit weird because he says, "These are ham." And Barry goes, "I'll have a cheese and chutney." So I never offered you one. Anyway, so they all grab a sandwich, and Wayne tries to get one, and Moxie says, he pulls it away. And they all and then Neville grabs the last sandwich and he goes, "Not you." And yeah, they're all clearly still they've got the hump with Wayne. Anyway, Wayne manages to grab a sandwich off the chair and he says, "Oh, I see, it's going to be like that, is it?" And Bomber says, "Sorry, Wayne, you can't expect any consideration from us when you've shown none in return." And then and then Barry pronounces it again differently. He says, "Who is this Brendan Mulcahy anyway?" And Moxie goes, "It's Mulcahy, Barry," having already pronounced it properly in the supermarket. So again, bit of a continuity error there. He goes, "No, it's not." He goes, "It's Mulcahy." He goes, "That's the name on the papers." He goes, "Yeah, I know." He goes, "But I can't pronounce that though." And he goes, "What's the point of having a false name then?" And he goes, "I didn't have any choice in the matter, you know." He says, "I didn't go to rent a name." He goes, "It was an alehouse in Kilburn." As you said last episode, George, you nailed it.
Yeah.
An alehouse.
Biddy Mulligan's, yeah.
And he goes, "I can hardly call myself Fitzherbert Carruthers." And he goes, Barry says, "Just as well." He goes, "You can't pronounce that either, can you?" He goes, "Who is Brendan Mulcahy anyway?" He goes, "Does he exist or is he just a creation?" And Oz says, "He's probably a dead man." And Wayne tries to make a joke. He goes, "I know how he feels." And then Oz obviously thinks he's in the know, and he says, "See, what happens is one Mick snuffs it over there in Potato Land, and his family flog his passport to another Mick, so he can come here and work, you know." And Bomber says that's not all he might get up to. And Neville says, "What? Do you mean like the IRA, Bomber?" And Osgard's, "IRA, Bomber's right." He goes, "You might find the anti-terrorist squad on your tail, Brendan, as well as your ordinary plods." And he goes, "You're really reassuring, you are, Oz." So Dennis arrives, and obviously, Bomber says, "Hello, Den's back." He says, "Save him, Masani." And Den says, "What's this, teddy bear's picnic?" And Oz, again, he likes to time his breaks. He says, "No," he says, "this is a dinner break, Dennis, of which we incidentally happen to have 12 minutes left." And Neville says, "What's going on, Den? Any word from Ali Fraser?" He says, "Aye, from now on, lads, we're working on Thornley Manor, rest home for retired gentlefolk." And Barry goes, "Ah, that's nice, isn't it?" So then we see the work. We go into a bit of a montage of the work being done on the building. So, you know, they're stripping out wood and knocking down walls and stripping wallpaper, and Barry's doing electrics. And anyway, so we cut down into the cellar where Bomber and Oz are working away, and Bomber finds some videotapes. So he says, hey Oz, he says, look what I found here. And he goes, what's that? And he says, video cassettes. I wonder what's on them. And he says, we've got now to play them on, have we? He says, sling them. And Bomber says, all right. So then after the finished work, Oz goes to the fridge and he offers Barry a beer, and he says, can? And Barry says, no, thank you. He says, Rosie Lee for me straight after work, thank you. And so Oz gives Bomber the beer. And he says, oh, Jesus Christ. And he's sort of coughing and spluttering. He's obviously got dust in his throat. He says, what was Dusty doing in that cellar? He says, we'll definitely get, he says to Bomber, we definitely got the short straw on that one, mate. And Bomber says, aye. He says, place rather put me in mind of a punk club I used to work in for a couple of days.
That's it.
It was the Rat's Arse, I think it was.
Arse.
And Neville says, you didn't find any priceless oil paintings or racks of vintage wine down there, did you not? And Oz says, no. He says, we found a couple. He says a couple of bottles of Chateau Exhibition would have done me. Again, referring to Newcastle Exhibition, that fantastic beer. And he says, now to talk, he says, old junk. He says, oh, we did find a couple of old video cassettes, and they're obviously teeing this up for later. And Moxie goes, video cassettes. And he goes, aye, video cassettes. He goes, you know, cassettes, what gone into videos. And he goes, yeah, I know. He goes, what for? Like, he goes, well, I was just thinking they might be a bit tasty. He says, bearing in mind the former owner of these premises was a porn merchant. And he goes, I think we might give them a look. And he goes, just in case they are depraved. And if you remember, do you remember when they were remember when they were buying the porn in Germany? And
yeah.
And that was his line. He goes, it's depraved. And Oz says, well, Brendan, he goes, tough shit that went in the skip. And Dennis says, well, I wouldn't be too worried, Moxie. We've now to play them on anyway. And he says, well, I know that. He says, but we've got to start thinking about what we're going to be doing in the evenings now that the barley moor's out of bounds. And he says, well, I didn't. And Nev says, well, I didn't propose to go and spend my nights looking for a pub I haven't been barred from. I'm away over to Sir James's to do some work on his barn. Anyone fancy giving us a hand? And Oz says, Hathaway and bollocks. He says, they're supposed to have done away with serfdom, man, haven't they? Neville says, he'll be paying us. And he says, anyway, you still owe him for those 2 trout you lifted out of his stream, referring to the last episode. And Oz says, excuse me. He says, I would have owed him for those 2 trout. He says, if I'd have got to eat them. He says, but the bastards hung on to them at the nick for a fish supper. But Oz is blaming the police for him not getting the chance the trout he stole. So anyway, Neville leaves, see you later, and they all say aye. And Oz makes a bit of a bow, but on his way out, he says, don't forget to bow. Anyway, Bomber says, well, I don't know about anybody else. He says, but I'm going to go and try the barley moor again. He says, after all, it was only one of us that strumped the daughter. Even someone as unreasonable as Arthur Pringle should see that. And Den says, I wouldn't bank on that. Mind you, it's worth a try, I suppose. And Barry makes some kind of grumbling noise, and Dennis is like, eh. And he goes, as an object lesson, Barry's, gets on his sort of high horse again, and he says, as an object lesson in the futility of mankind, the last few minutes of conversation would be hard to beat. And Moxie just goes, get to the point, Barry, if there is one. He says, the point is that here you all are in the most fascinating part of the English countryside, and you're bloody thrashing around like a bloody goldfish in a schoolboy's pocket, trying to find things to amuse yourselves with. He says, I mean, what a pathetic comment on your imaginations. And Barry, clearly thinks he's superior. And Oz says, well, have you got any suggestions then, Blue Peter? And And Barry says, as a matter of fact, yes, I have. He says, when I was working upstairs in the attic, I happened to gaze out of the window and spy a rather lovely thing. He goes, a spire. And you always know what's under a spire, don't you? And Bomber takes the piss and goes, let me think, a church. And Oz has a bit of a laugh at Bomber taking the piss out of Barry. He says, not just a church, Bomber. He says, but a store of local history and a museum of architecture, which I think is a little bit, a little bit of a stretch, what Barry thinks he's going to find. And Dennis just says, but has it got a bar, Barry? And Barry says, still time. We could pop down to the local shop and buy some crayons, tape and such like. And for instance, spend an evening brass rubbing.
Yeah, I love the way he says it. Yeah, brass rubbing.
Brass rubbing. And Oz makes a joke. He says, well, you read about one thing, Barry. He goes, I could certainly do to rub a bit of brass the neat. Ho, and he makes it like, ho, 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 ho. So Oz is clearly trying to get his hands on a young lady of the night. So they cut to the church and Barry arrives and you can see he's armed with his brass rubbing kit. And so Barry's off to do brass rubbing and the camper pulls up outside the Barley Moor. And Dennis says, right, lads, just give us 5 minutes to reason with them, all right? And Oz says, right, but if that doesn't work, give us 2 minutes and I'll rip his lungs out. No, the diplomat. Oz the diplomat as ever. And as we see now, Oz, his diplomatic ways potentially ruin it. So Dennis walks into the Barley Moor and Pringle says, 30 seconds to get out or I'll call the police. And Dennis says, look, Arthur, hear me out, please. He says, will you look, Arthur, I know the behaviour of one of our group has caused you much heartache and believe you and me, we feel exactly the same about him as you do. I mean, that's why we've disciplined him ourselves in a way that you would have approved of. And he says, castration? And he says, of the social kind, Arthur, yes. He's confined to base. He's in the glass house, as you brave fighter pilots might say. So, Dennis is, cajoling and complimenting and, trying to, and he says, that still leaves the rest of you to make mayhem. And he goes, oh, come on, Arthur. He goes, I'm a respectable married man. He goes, I mean, outside in my van, I've got 3 other men who've done a hard day's graft and simply want a quiet pint and an evening's conversation at your fireside as a reward. I mean, they're not rapists or thieves or vagabonds. And at this point, you can potentially...
He's making good progress.
Look, he is. That's what I'm saying is, Arthur's initial defences, you can see are potentially coming down. And Dennis is being very, very persuasive. And then all of a sudden, we just hear from the van, from outside, is Oz screaming at the top of his lungs. And he says, has that bastard given in yet, Dennis? and obviously, as soon as Dennis hears this, he just goes, oh. And he just walks up, he goes, you okay? And he just walks up like knowing that, and so again, Oz fucked that right up for everybody. So they cut back and Barry's in the church and he's doing his little bit of brass rubbing and he hears a door creak and it gives him a bit of a scare and the vicar comes in. And sort of scares Barry, and the vicar sort of stands over Barry, and he goes, "Very good, I must say." And Barry goes, "What the?" And he goes, "Oh, hello, I'm sorry to call you." And he goes, "No." And then he stands up and he goes, Barry Taylor," and he goes, "Ian Burt," and he goes, "Pleased to meet you. I hope you don't mind. I'm just doing a bit of brass rubbing." And he goes, "So I see." He goes, "No, I don't mind at all." He goes, "Provided you make a small contribution to the upkeep of the church." The vicar straight away sinking the fangs in for a couple of quid. And Barry says, "Oh yes, of course." And he gets his money out and the vicar says, No, please just pop it in the collection box on your way out. And he goes, "I'm afraid I'll be shutting up the shop in a few minutes." And Barry says, "Oh, that's all right, I'll come back tomorrow." And then he makes a bit of a joke. He says, "I don't suppose he'll be going anywhere." And the vicar says, "Oh yeah." He goes, "Staying locally, are you?" He goes, "Thornley Manor, doing a bit of restoration work." And he goes, "Turning it into an old people's home, actually." And he goes, "Oh yes." He goes, "I've heard it was being done up." He goes, I don't suppose your chaps fancy doing a bit of restoration work on my church, do they? Gratis, of course. Not even satisfied with a couple of quid from Barry, he's now instantly trying to sink the fangs in and get the guys to do some free work. So, you know, absolutely no shame, the vicar. And Barry says, no, he says, I'm sorry, Vicar, he says, but we're a bit thin on stonemasons in our team. He says, now, if it was an extension you want building, and he makes like a fake laugh. And the vicar says, how are you finding the manor? He says, it must be rather bleak. And he sort of, he picks his jacket up and hands it to Barry to sort of indicate that he wants him to leave. And he says, well, the evenings look like they're going to be a bit empty. That's why I turned my hand to this. He says, all the other fellas have gone out on they've gone for a walk, like.
Gone for a walk, yeah.
And he says, well, if you do find it one evening free, do pop round to the vicarage for a cup of tea. And he says, oh, thank you very much. I'm sure they'd like that. Obviously not. And the vicar says, right, he says, that's it, lights out, I'm afraid, I'll have to see you to the door. And then he says something which puts the shits right up Barry. He says, Thornley Manor, eh? He goes, I don't suppose you've had the chance to see the ghost yet. And he goes, the ghost? And he goes, yes, it appears a couple of times a year, I gather. And so straight away, it cuts back to the manor, and the lads are in their sleeping bags. And Barry starts regaling the story. He says, look, lads, listen, guess what? And Oz says, don't tell us. You found a pub at the bottom of the garden, and the manager's a pixie, and the beer's free, and the divans serve cockneys. And he says, no, listen. He says, thanks to me dipping into local history, right? He says, I've just heard something very interesting about this house. And they all go, what? And he says, it's got a ghost. But the way he said, he goes, it's got a ghost. And they all go, rubbish, and Hathaway and shite. And Wayne tries to get back in the conversation. He goes, well, I hope it's got its own sleeping bag because it ain't sharing mine. And Barry says, listen, he goes, listen, apparently right at the end of the last century, the owner of this house discovered an old tinker trespassing on his grounds, and he bludgeoned him to death. And now apparently the ghost of this old tinker stalks the halls and corridors of this house seeking revenge. And he says, and Oz says, well, at least we'll get some spirits the neat. Making another joke. And Dennis says, do us a favour, will you, Barry? Stalk down to the kitchen and get us a couple of cans of lager. And they all laugh at him. And he says, you're joking. He says, I suggest from now on, we move around this house in pairs. So they cut to obviously a little bit later that night, and Barry's sort of talking in his sleep, and he's blah, 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 and grumbling away. And he wakes up, and he says to himself, he goes, I better have a pee after that. So he gets up and so Barry's walking around the house on his own, the very thing he just said he didn't want to do. And he goes to the toilet, but the door is locked. And
some good eerie music as well, isn't there, in the background?
Yeah. So the old creepy sort of music there. And Barry finds the door locked to the toilet, and in a sort of a bit of quite a fearful, meek voice, he goes, who's in there? And Moxie goes, it's all right, Barry, it's only me, I'll be out in a tick. And then Barry looks up the corridor and he sees the tinker, the tramp, the ghost. And Barry shits himself, and the tramp, the tinker, laughs down the corridor at Barry. And he goes, Moxie, he goes, I've just seen a ghost. And he goes, Brendan, he goes, I've just seen a ghost, Brendan. So obviously Moxie's more concerned about his identity than he is about the ghost. So we cut from the depravity of Thornley Manor, and we cut to Ali Fraser's villa in Marbella, which is in Marbella. And so Ali Fraser and Vicky are playing a game of chess. Now,
I'm surprised chess would be a game of hers. I didn't think she
was. We have already established that she's potentially not the sharpest tool in the box. Very easy on the eyes, but not spot on the ears, maybe. But you think, oh, playing chess, that's a bit much. Anyway, so Vicky says, did you ever see the Thomas Crown Affair? And I don't know whether Ali Fraser's making a joke or not. He says, no. He says, I never went to rock concerts, Vicky. I was busy working. And she says, man, it was a film. And it was Steve McQueen and Faye Dunaway seduced each other across the chessboard. And just Ali Fraser doesn't seem interested. And she goes, well, it was a very sexy scene. And he says, really? He says, I imagine you might find that a wee bit uncomfortable, all these bits sticking into your bum. And the phone rings. And as he stands up to answer it, she goes, will you make your move now? Otherwise, I'm going to be here all day. And Ali Fraser just moves one of his pawns. And she's not impressed. She goes, ooh, live dangerously, why don't you? So he answers the phone, and it's obviously Howard. And he says, oh, good morning, Howard. How are you? And then we see that Howard is in his office, and he says, I'm extremely well, Ali. Thank you. I just thought I'd let you know our planning application's in, and my personal contact on the council says there'll be no trouble. So I don't know how an architect from Newcastle has just turned up in North Derbyshire and developed a contact on the local council. But I'm assuming that however he did it, there was a brown envelope changing hands.
Yeah.
And Ali Fraser says, good, I'm very pleased to hear that. He says, my new drones are also coming along nicely. He says, good. And he says, I just thought it would now be an opportune time to discuss the costings of the materials. And he goes, I've drawn up 3 different budgets for fitting the surfaces in the interior. And he goes, how are they running? And he goes, at 22,000, 48,000, and top of the range, 65,000. Now, at this moment, we discover Vicky's chess playing abilities. So while Ali's playing chess, she thinks she's playing drafts. So what she what she does is she takes one of her pieces and she jumps over the top.
I didn't notice that. Oh, I missed that. And
then jumps over another. So she jumps 2 of Ali's pieces and takes 2 of the pieces off the board and sits there like she's a fucking genius. You're like that. Don't think you quite understand the rules of this game, look. So yes, Vicky is, Vicky is certainly proven that she's not the brain of Britain by her chess playing abilities. And so Ali continues, he says, oh, well, I think Howard, he says, in view of the revised nature of the premises, he says, I think it would be a wee bit of a pity to waste all of your fancy Dan trappings on people with one foot in the grave. He says, I think we should err on the side of caution, don't you, Howard? And he says, as you wish, Ali. He says, but the first figure I quoted is an absolute rock bottom using the cheapest materials available. And he says, that's all right. He says, I've already laid out enough cash on this project. It's time I started earning a nest egg for my old age. He says, so he says, I want no corner left uncut, Howard. Do you understand? And you can pass that on to Dennis too. And he says, will do. He says, incidentally, it may interest you to know that his lads are currently staying at the house. And he says, well, don't mention it just yet, then, Howard, but sometime in the future, it might be wise to broach the little subject of rent with them. Rent. And he chuckles and he goes, I'll get the meters read as well if you like. And he goes, I was not joking, Howard. And he goes, right, well, I'll get the plans out to you by the weekend. And he goes, lovely, I look forward to seeing them. He goes, bye for now, bye. And he puts the phone down, he focuses back on the chessboard. He goes, my God. He goes, if Faye Dunaway played chess like you, she'd be lucky if she got a good night kiss. And gets up and blows a kiss on, and he puts a kiss and he rubs it on Vicky's cheek. So he's obviously, that's his way of calling her stupid.
Yeah.
So we cut back and we see Moxie goes
Brendan.
Brendan goes into the Barley Moor on his own. And Pringle's quite cordially says, good evening. And Moxie's got an Irish accent. He's like, good evening. Oh, I can't do it. I couldn't do that Irish accent there. And he goes, what'll it be? He goes, I'll have a pint of bitter, please. There you go. That's a bit better. He goes, I'll have a pint of bitter, please, in a straight glass. And so Pringle pours his pint. He goes, have you been in before? He goes, I think I was in here one lunchtime a few weeks ago. Because I thought I recognised you, and he puts the pint. He goes, that's 87p. 87 pence a pint, George.
Oh, fantastic. The
That
good old days.
That was the good old days, eh? And so he pays for his beer, and he goes, would it be all right, like, if I took some drinks out to my kids? And Pringle says, so, provided they bring the glasses back and provided they don't break any. He goes, no, they're very well behaved. And he goes, what'll it be then? Orange juice, Coca-Cola, and Moxie goes, 5 pints of bitter. He goes, they're grown lads. And so Pringle sees through his facade, and he goes, there must be. And he goes, are you Irish by any chance? And he goes, yes, I am, as a matter of fact. Brendan Mulcahy is the name. And he pronounces the name properly. And he goes, well, you can piss off.
Piss off.
He goes, I don't serve mix in here. And Moxie walks out and he pours the pint down the sink. But obviously, apparently, that was back in the day. That was a bit of a common theme, wasn't it? They wouldn't serve Irish.
Oh, I can remember. I can remember signs on the pub, windows. No Irish. It's usually no travellers. That was the thing. I mean, they can't do that nowadays. But you know all about the travelling folk.
Yeah. So anyway, Moxie. He comes out of the pub, and Oz is like, where's the drinks at? And he goes, he wouldn't let us have them. He goes, why not? Did he recognise you? He goes, no. He goes, he won't serve mix, apparently. And Oz says, that man's, he got about as much charm as a mass grave. So they go back to the manor, and he hears there's noise coming from the room, and Barry shits himself, and he's like, shh. He goes, I hear voices, shoo. And he goes, it'll just be London with a boiler in, man. He goes, no, they're male voices. And Bomber says, well, it's either the ghost or Wayne's on the turn. And so they just go, how are you, man? So as they walk in, Wayne is sitting watching a TV. And he says, all right, lads. And Oz says, what's all this? He goes, well, I thought I'd had a night. He says, I thought I'd have a night in with the old goggle box. And Neville says, where did this lot come from? And he says, I got it, didn't I? He says, the least I could do under the circumstances, seeing as I dropped you all in it. And then it says, what's the programme then? And on the TV is Kenny Ames playing a game of golf. And he goes, it's one of them tapes Oz and Bomber found. I'm not a connoisseur of porn, but this looks like a golf lesson to me. And Oz says, well, fast forward a bit. And he keeps it, and it's just golf. And he says, well, this is about as interesting as the car park at the Barley Moor. And Wayne says, yeah, hang on. He says, I did take the liberty of renting a tape for the evening, a bit of a culture delight. He goes, what is it? And he goes, The Stud, which was, by all accounts, a racy movie with Joan Collins. And he thought, yes. I thought Joan Collins would go down well. But he puts the film on, and it's clearly not The Stud. And it's a picture of a black horse running through a field. And Barry says, I don't remember this bit. And Oz says, what's this? He says, that's not The Stud, you duck egg. He says, that's Black Beauty. And everyone groans. And Dennis says, well, it's an easy enough mistake to make. I mean, they've both got horses in the title, mind. And Bomber says, well, that was a short-lived pleasure. And Wayne says, yeah, no. He goes, hang on. He goes, I've got one more left. He goes, let's see what's on this one. And now they strike gold. And he puts the tape in, and there's like a sex party going on with Kenny Ames and all of his little porn, with his porn ladies. And there's a lot of people at the inn, and Oz notices it straight away, and he goes, hey, he goes, this is this room right here, man. He goes, look. And obviously the camera, they see the camera panning around, and Kenny Ames has got some nice young ladies. And Dennis says, he goes, look, it's Kenny Ames. And then so instantly they're all gathered round the telly, and you see an amazing, like the shot is like, it's like as if the camera is just above the telly looking down, and all the lads are lined up. And they're all now paying very, very close attention to what's going on. And there's, like I say, some very scantily clad ladies, and they all start making noise. And Barry says the word. He goes, look, bosoms. And Oz is like making the gesture. He sits there and he goes, and he sticks his tongue out, and he's like that. Anyway, so there's a young lady.
Yeah. Oh, Ginny Johnson.
With a timeout. Let's just rewind for a second. Forgot to talk about the ghost.
Oh, right. Yeah. Very famous actor. Well,
Yeah.
he's been in loads of stuff.
So, apologies to our listeners. We'll just put a pin in that, what we were about to do there. So, yes, so in fact, we'll do them both now. So, the two cameos in this episode that we've not seen before. So, the ghost is played by a chap by the name of Paddy Joyce. And Paddy Joyce had a career that spanned nearly 50 years, from 1953 to 1999. And he had 114 credits on IMDb. And he was including Please Sir, The Rolf Harris Show, Coronation Street, Z Cars, Dixon of Dock Green, The Oneiden Line, Metal Mickey,
it's a great series, yeah.
Metal Mickey, Minder, Terry and June, Adrian Mole, Little and Large, Lovejoy, You Rang My Lord, that you were talking about last week, East End, The Bill, and Father Ted. So obviously a lot of the stuff that, back in 1953 I'd never heard of, but those were a lot of the more modern
I think he was in a very famous war film as well, The Cruel Sea. I think he was in that.
Like I say, he was in 114 things. So had a very, very extensive career. So yes, it was a very, very prolific actor who was playing the ghost. Now, George, tell us, you're very, very keen on this one, so I'm going to hand it over to you. Tell us who plays Pee-wee, the girl on the video.
Yeah, that's Miss Gilly Johnson, very, very famous page 3 girl in the 80s. She's one of the biggest ones.
It said she was the very first woman to ever go topless on page 3 in the Daily Mirror.
Oh, right.
So she was indeed a pioneer. She was also in a pop group called Blonde on Blonde. I would assume you probably got all of their albums stashed away somewhere, George.
Yeah. Well, she had a great pair of knockers, I know that. Yeah.
Well, and she also wrote 2 books. So not just a great pair of tits, but a singer and an author. So yes. So she says her name is Pee-wee, and she says, "What's your name?" And the camera pans round, and who is it but Mr. Arthur Pringle? And the lads go mental. They're all screaming, and it's absolutely hilarious. And he's a bit of a stumble bum, but he's obviously quite interested in young Pee-wee. And he says, "It's Pringle, Arthur Pringle." And she goes, "Hello, Arthur. And what do you do?" And he goes, "I run the local pub." He goes, "Kenny Ames invited me here." And she goes, "Oh, are you local?" She goes, "Kenny told us to be nice to you. You do want me to be nice to you, don't you, Arthur?" And he says the infamous line. He goes, call me Tiger." And again, the lads roar, and the shout goes up, and you can just see they haven't been as happy for quite some time, and they're smiling. And then Arthur proceeds to attempt to latch his dirty mustached lip around the intimate parts of young Pee-wee. So what we see is that the next day they pull up outside the Barley Moor, and they obviously have a plan. So Dennis says, "Right, lads," he says, "come on," he says, "let's get in there and we'll sort this bastard out." And he says, "Wayne," he says, "I think this is your moment, son." He says, "Go on, in you go." And he gives Wayne the videotape. And so Wayne walks in, and obviously Pringle sees him straight away, and he's not happy. He goes, "I warned you." And so Wayne approaches the bar, and he goes, "Before you say anything, Arthur," he goes, "I want you to know we totally understand. And we'd have probably done the same thing in your position. You know, the wife's done a runner, some topless bit of crumpet's got its legs wrapped right round your neck." And Pringle says, he's like, "Not only are you rubbish," he says, "but you talk rubbish as well. I'm going to call the police." And Wayne says, "I wouldn't do that if I were you, old son." And he goes, "They might be interested in seeing this." And he goes, remember a little party at Thornley Manor. Kenny Ames and a bird called Pee-wee. And this bloke with a video camera, he goes, yes. He goes, Mister, and then he puts on, he makes an imitation of Eamon Andrews, and he puts on the accent. He goes, Mr. Arthur Tiger Pringle, this is your life. And Arthur tries to grab the videotape, and he pulls it away, and everyone in unison just goes with the theme tune to This Is Your Life. Da, 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 da. And that is the end of the episode. So we find out how Tiger was christened. Yeah. So we not very many credits there compared to the last episode. So the credits come up, and obviously the lads are all got a credit, and then Ali Fraser and Kenny Ames share a credit. Howard Radcliffe, the Reverend Ian Burton, and the Ghost share a credit. And then Arthur Pringle, Norma, Vicky, and the girl on the video, young Pee-wee, George's little squeeze. They all get a credit on the end. So yes, what a fantastic episode. So last week was a Lincoln episode, but now the work has begun. They're back to work. They're back in the barley moor, and normal order.
What else could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. So, normal order of some kind has been restored. So, like I said, this is a fantastic episode, very funny, very enjoyable. And if you've got any comments about this week's episode, you please do email us on Auf Wiedersehen Again @gmail.com. Please follow the Instagram @Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Please follow us on Twitter @Auf Again. Please like and share the Facebook page, Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast. Our YouTube channel, please do subscribe to Auf Wiedersehen Again Podcast and click that bell for alerts to all new episodes. Or if it's audio you're after, we are on all good podcast platforms: Spotify, iTunes, Anchor, Google Breaker, and many, many more. Remember, new episodes are released every Friday at 10 a.m. and our music is composed and performed by Lee Dusky. So please, please, please do like and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Remember our sponsor, Top Gun Tattooing, number 12 at Harris Arcade in Reading, topguntattoo.co.uk, audible 189 968 667. And remember, you get 20% discount off any tattoo with Zach by quoting the code Hadaway and Shiteman. And remember, a free Neville and Lockie tattoo for every single reader, which George is going to be sporting on next week's episode, or the week after, maybe. See, the next time he gets himself up here. So remember, our current competition, our latest competition winner, Mr. Russell Cox, via Twitter. Russell, please do get in touch with us with your address, and we will send you your prize of the genuine signed copy picture of the guys in season 3. And remember, our new picture, our new competition is going to be the original signed picture copy of the black and white picture of the lads in the barley moor. So please do track down the post on the social medias and like I say, follow us on the social media, like the post, tag 3 friends and share that post. And you too could be in with a chance of winning these fantastic, genuine, signed copy pictures of the Magnificent Seven. So that is it for this week's episode, George. Sorry, and remember, just again, big shout out to Graham Teasdale for providing these prizes. And if you would like to purchase any of these fantastic air fresheners and or pictures, please do follow and make friends with Graham Teasdale on the Facebook pages. So that's it for this week, George. Been an absolute cracker. Thoroughly enjoyed discussing that one, and very much looking forward to next week's episode. But until then, George.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Auf Wiedersehen, Pet.
Oh, yeah, man. All out of options, nothing to choose. I pissed out on Netflix, I'm sick of the news. I'd sign up to Sky, but I don't want Cockney attitude.